Welcome to AIW Empowers interview series. I'm so happy to welcome our guest today, Andrea Chase. How are you, Andrea?
I'm doing well, Lynn. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. So let's jump right into your journey. Can you tell us about what you do now as your job, or in your case, jobs?
Fair enough, jobs. So I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for, it's crazy to think about, a decade now. And with my partner, we have a consulting company called Bates Global Inc. And we offer business analysis, IT solutions. And we recently just rolled out a marketing suite that I'm excited to talk about a little bit called Marketingverse. And that's essentially digital marketing solutions for small business owners, women owned businesses, and we're going to engage with government as well. And the second job, I guess I have, is being the founder of tech startup ProCabby Limited, which is a mobile application for the professional taxi and limousine chauffeur industry. Really something to help them get some skin back in the game and provide passengers with a more secure ride on demand solution.
Sounds like you have a lot going on. Before we dive further into that, though, let's travel back in time to where it all started. Can you tell us about your journey in general? Where did you start and how did you get here?
It's been a windy journey, Lynn. I think all entrepreneurs can probably relate. I wasn't a person when I was 5 years old that said, okay, I know what I want to do. And then I just went and did it. I've wanted to try many careers and I've explored different industries, in hospitality, teaching English as a foreign language. Um, Sales and marketing, and obviously business management. So it's been a bit of a journey. But one thing that I always knew was, number one, I didn't really feel like I fully fit into the workforce. I always felt that there maybe was a something else out there, some other place for me. And the other thing is, I've always sort of been a person that beat to my own drum. As you know, I'm definitely a person that likes to do things in my own fashion. And so I think it was all of those kind of pieces that eventually brought me to entrepreneurship. But like I said, it wasn't the straight and narrow pathway to get there.
So, how did you discover entrepreneurship?
That's a really great question. And it's funny you're asking that because I know I had a podcast interview with somebody recently, and she said, entrepreneurship and being a business owner has become almost a trend in the past 5 years. And I thought that was funny. And I think there is a little bit of truth to that. I think there's some glorification. But to be honest, it was right before I went back to school. So I have my undergraduate degree in psychology, but it was at the end of my career in university that I started thinking I maybe wanted to go back to school for business, but I wasn't really sure. So when I was ready to go back to school, I started exploring college programs. I decided, okay, I think I'll try college this time. So I literally started talking to different program heads at a couple of different colleges, one of which was at Algonquin in Ottawa, where I ended up going. And they didn't actually call it entrepreneurship at that time, but I think so. At the time, it was called small and medium enterprise management. But essentially, it was entrepreneurship training. So it gave you sort of that overview of the different aspects that you would need to start and run a business. And that is what sort of sold me on the program, was that there would be a varied group of classes that would kind of lead you to be as ready as you could be. I mean, no education is going to fully prepare you, but in essence, that's probably when I first learned about that. And that was, gee, I graduated from that program in 2010, and it was a 2 year program. So probably in 2008, I really started to become familiarized with what entrepreneurship really is.
It's interesting, I think, that someone mentioned it's kind of like a trend. Um, But do you feel like during your time when you've spoken to other entrepreneurs and seen new and upcoming entrepreneurs through your work, um, because we've known each other for a long time, so I know that you've helped people with their business cases and whatnot, that um people go into it blindly, like, people do in trends, or do you get more of a sense of um doing things very purposely from people around you?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. I think that it's a little bit of a mix of both, to be fair. I think there are some people that definitely sort of have bought into the glorification, if I can say that, of what being an entrepreneur is, right? Because in fairness, I think we can agree there's a lot of things on social media that sort of lends to the notion that, if you're a business owner, you're going to be driving a really high end car, you're going to be living this lap of luxury, taking private jets and doing all this. The reality is that's a very, very minute percentage of people that get to that point. And the other part of it is that it's not easy to get to that point unless you come from, like, you're sitting on gold or something, right? Unless you come from a lot of money. I think most of those people that we see have been in the trenches of growing a business, but we don't always see what that looks like. So I think there's some people, to answer your question, that are in that camp, but I do think that there's some other people that genuinely just really want to either make the world a better place by through their business venture, or genuinely want to work for themselves, and they have maybe a passion project or something that evolved into their business. And we saw that really as on a highlighter during COVID. I think there was a lot of people who, really had to look their careers and jobs in the faces because the nature of work changed so much. And a lot of people did leave their careers and did leave their former industry, sorry, and went out on their own. And so I think there's different reasons why people do it, but I think there are a lot of people who have really altruistic motives, and then some who maybe just want to make a lot of money,
Which is fair.
which is fine and totally okay too. Yeah, absolutely.
Completely fair. So let's go back again to the start of your career, but throughout your career. Um, can you recount some of the mistakes you might have made earlier on in your career?
Oh, there were so many, but I guess there's a couple that I would like to display today. I think one of the biggest things that was a mistake was listening to everybody around me and listening to what they thought I should be doing, what they thought was best for me, maybe what they thought was the right path for me. Go to school, get a job, get your feet established. The other thing I would say is I think I've been I guess the way I'll say is a little bit of a victim to imposter syndrome for a long time. So I think for a long time, I maybe knew, like I said, that I wanted to go out and start a business. I wasn't exactly sure what that looked like, but I had this idea, and probably from conditioning and stuff too, that I wasn't ready, or that I wasn't the right person to do that because, finance isn't my forte. I know I had met people in my life who thought that because maybe financial aspects of business wasn't my super strength, that I couldn't be a business owner. And I think I let a lot of that stuff sort of seep in, and it affected my confidence.
Mhm. Um, I think it's interesting that you mention letting other people's perhaps perception or wishes for your own career, you know, control your direction a bit more than you would have liked. Did you carry the guilt once you shifted from their direction to your own of that kind of impact with you throughout your change when you finally changed direction? Do you find that the guilt stayed with you that you were uh, perhaps ignoring their wishes?
I do. I do. I think particularly with certain family members, right? Because you care generally about what these people that you love think. You want to make people in your life proud. And it's that hard, I think, balancing act between knowing in your heart what's right for yourself while at the same time not disappointing people. And I mean, some of that people probably can hear from what I'm saying is a bit of the people pleaser in me. And so I think just due to the nature that I sort of am accustomed to kind of going down that road, I've always wanted to make people happy. I think I definitely did carry a lot of guilt for a really long time.
Honestly, I can say that it sounds completely fair to me. I think it has to do perhaps with generational
Right.
um, expectations and societal expectations that because of certain things our parents may have gone through, then they want us to have it easy, and they want certain things to
Yeah.
happen in a way that will be comfortable. However, the world has changed so much, and so things
Has.
cannot necessarily be done the same way, or the same steps don't necessarily apply. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. You also mentioned imposter syndrome. Would you say that that has been perhaps a weakness that has impacted your career the most?
100%. It's creeped in every now and then, but it's definitely been that reoccurring theme that pops up now and again. I mean, I've definitely developed some tools to be able to recognize it when it's kind of creeping in. I can better identify that, okay, maybe that's what it is. And also kind of have worked on finding a system that works for me where I can work on combating some of those feelings, but it still does come up for sure. And I do think it has been a weakness because it's just distracted me from thinking forward about what I'm doing with my career, right? It takes a lot of mental strain and energy to be in that imposter syndrome place. And it's really hard to think about anything else when that's overtaking your mind.
Absolutely. And I hear it all the time, even in interviews with people who have been extremely successful and are VPs of companies and have been for years, decades, that they still get that.
Yeah,
And you read it mostly from women. Um, and so it's something that I think people can really relate to, and that I think it's okay as long as we admit that we have it, we talk about it, and we can kind of like it's kind of like that, acknowledge and like push it backwards and keep
yeah.
going. But it doesn't necessarily go away overnight. And even if you have all the success in the world, you might still feel that way. It's hard. It's a
It's
hard thing to
very
get past.
hard. I
Hmm.
appreciate the fact you said there's people who are very accomplished that are in these C-level suites for maybe their own company or larger organizations, really successful in the sense that they've been able to grow their business, not just financially, but they've built a network and they have a community and all of these kind of things. And we may, from the outside, look at these people and think, how could that person have imposter syndrome? It just makes no sense. But at the same time, it's almost comforting to know that, oh, it's not great that a lot of people experience that, but it's comforting to know that we're not alone in that. And some of those feelings are normal and natural, especially when you're doing something kind of offbeat and something so large on your own.
Absolutely. And beyond the imposter syndrome, what other challenges have you faced in your career? And it could be in any of the industries that you currently work in, or in past ones as well.
So one thing that I would love to share is about ProCabby being a very male dominated industry. One thing that's been super challenging with that platform and with that startup is the fact that number one, I'm a woman. Number two, I do not come from this space. And to be fair, it's a little bit of the old boys club, right? So there's been countless times. I can't even tell you how many times I've been in meetings or situations with people in the industry, different stakeholders, and they usually look at me sideways to start off and go, why are you here? Like, what brings you here? How are you here? And it always kind of takes me back a little bit. Like I just sort of have to collect myself when I get asked that. I definitely manage and mitigate those questions better than I used to because it's happened so many times. But that's one really challenging thing is having to get over that conversation when really I just want to be able to share the value of what we're doing, see if there's some alignment there for possible partnership or something of that nature, and having to kind of explain myself and own my place as a woman in that industry can be really, really tricky. On the entrepreneurship side in general, I would say it can be really tough when things maybe don't go very well. I don't know if this is answering your question, but when you sort of have those bumps in the road, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And to be able to weather those storms can be really, really difficult, but it can also be really challenging when you look at objective KPIs about growth and success. And if they're not really where you want them to be, and that's sort of a reoccurring theme over time, to get to a point to make a decision about whether or not to carry on or not. And I don't know if there's other people who have their own businesses who are listening to this, who could relate to this, but I know for me, one of the biggest challenges with particularly with ProCavi is knowing when to pivot and knowing when to say enough is enough. I haven't figured that out yet.
I mean, those are certainly some large challenges, and there's no guidebook, right? Like
No,
everyone has a way they've dealt with it or had to go through things, and every situation is so different that I think it's from hearing from people like you that people can start to put their own toolbox together and see, if and when they come across things like that, what can they use, what can they, change a little bit to make it work for them. So I think that's excellent.
thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. Don't have all the answers, but I hope that, sharing openly could shed some light to somebody who's maybe going through the same thing.
Absolutely. Now let's switch it back to more positive again. Uh, what do you think has been your biggest success factor in your career?
I think there's a few things at play there. I think one is just my personality, to be honest with you. I think I'm a little bit stubborn, sort of in the sense when I get something in my mind, as you probably know, knowing me, I don't lay until I see that come to fruition, even if it isn't a success, quote unquote. But when I get something in my mind, it's kind of hard to get it out. And you can ask my parents too. Growing up, I was always that child that if I wanted to do something, I wanted to do it. So I think the perseverance hat has fared me very well. The other thing I would say is having a strong vision of where I want to go. So I know that we all see the future very differently and we all see goal setting very differently. But one thing that I think I've had since I can remember, probably as a teenager, is I've always been a big vision dreamer kind of person, almost to the point of people thinking I might be just crazy and unrealistic. But I think that that's actually been a big strength in my career, particularly navigating the world of entrepreneurship and business ownership, right? So, I think always going back to why you're doing what you're doing can be really helpful in that regard. And I think I've been fairly good at being able to do that. I guess the last thing I would say is just kind of the fact that I've jumped in head first with a lot of things. And that's really terrifying, but sort of having I guess, the gumption to just say, okay, I'm going to do it and I'm going to figure it out. And I know not everybody thinks like that. And I totally respect that because it's a little crazy. If I were to look from the outside at myself, I'd probably go, how does that, person just think they're going to figure everything out. But I think that that actually has proved to be a strength on my path.
I see that more as a no regrets kind of living. And I think it's admirable because sometimes we push things back so much that it starts to impact our mental health and other areas of our life that we can no longer enjoy. So I think it's really admirable. And you're mentioning, you see the light, perhaps life in a different light. And I guess my question is, do you think in a life where we're constantly told to live in the present, that perhaps you live in the future?
That's a neat question. Again, I'm loving these questions because a lot of them I've never been asked, and that's what I love. I love to like be challenged by these questions. Um, I think it's a little bit of both, or actually a little bit of all three. So I think there is obviously some lessons and merit to looking backwards, right? That's how we learn. We learn the most from the things that probably didn't work the way that we thought it would. Obviously, it's super important. Time passes us by very quickly, right? So I think there is a lot of great importance to being present and accepting where you are and absorbing where you are. But if you do have some big goals for yourself, it's very challenging to achieve those goals if you don't think ahead a bit. So I think for me, I'm sort of going between the three, I would say. Um, yeah, a lot of times I'm looking forward, but I have to remind myself to kind of come back to the present. So I think it's a juggling between all three.
That makes complete sense. It's a bit more harmonious.
It doesn't always feel harmonious, but you said that so eloquently. But I think that's the goal deep down inside, is to kind of have them all be learning experiences and all be able to shape where you're going. But at certain points in time, the future oriented mindset takes over more. Like right now, launching the new marketing suite, that's sort of the chapter we're in, right? Is okay, what is the vision for this arm of the company? Where do we want to go with this? What's the growth goals and trajectories, right? So I think there's times where looking in the future is very important and more advantageous than other times.
Hmm. So we've talked about some of your career challenges, but thinking back now, has there been a career setback that you now see was actually an advantage?
Absolutely. There's one period of time that comes to mind when I think about this, and when I look at it now, it was the best decision, right? But at the time, I had no idea. So after I went back to school, I went back to school, got my diploma in business management, but I still was feeling like I need more experience. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And I kept thinking there has to be this perfect timing, but there's never really a perfect time. So anyway, I was looking, to find a full-time job to get experience, and I had a really hard time. It was coming out of a recession at that time. Maybe it was just the way of the universe. I don't know, but I was having a really tough time finding a full-time job. So I did what we have to do, right? And I was working a few part-time jobs for a couple of years. And then I finally found a full time role. And it was a government funded program. I was an administrator for a rehabilitative seniors program, which sounds completely off base to a lot of my experiences, but it's one of the other hats I wore at one point in time. And I did like it. It was a stable job in the sense that it was, Monday through Friday. There was no homework there. I wasn't bringing work home with me. I enjoyed working with the seniors. I didn't think I would stay there forever, but it was only a year and a half into it where the funding from the program was cut, and I was out of work again. And I felt like I was back to square one. I was feeling very defeated at the time, to be honest with you, and just not really knowing what to do next. And I felt like I said, I felt like I was just back to square one. Like, what is my education given to me? What is even these work experiences really provided to me? And then it was at that time where my partner and I decided, you know what? I guess we might as well go out and start this business that we've been talking about for so long. Like maybe now is the time. So that's what we did. We registered the business, Bates, at that time. And looking back, that was one of the biggest career successes that pivoted me into this pathway. But at the time, I certainly wasn't seeing it that way.
It must be scary though to be faced with that decision. At the same time, it's almost like there's no way to lose. It's almost like a win-win.
Yeah, I think so looking back, yes, but it is scary when you're really in the trenches of trying to make that decision. I mean, it wasn't finite, right? Like we can always try something new, but it felt like there were more stakes in the ground at that point,
Mm.
right? Because you're incorporating, you're having to get your social presence out there. I mean, social media was not at all what it is now, but you still had to have some marketing, right? So that looked a lot different back then. But thinking about all these moving parts and basically thinking to myself, now it's not just group assignments and homework and being graded. This is real life at this point. Like I'm taking
Mhm.
a lot of what I learned and then learning as I go as well, but taking a lot of these skills I'd learned in school and actually writing, the business plan for myself. Like this is not just for the professor anymore. So it was a really interesting period of time. I also, at that time, on a personal level, was planning to get married that year. And so, there's all these other financial stressors. And there were periods of time where we questioned, should we even go through with the wedding? Because it's just putting so much stress and strain. And as you know, we went through with it, but there was so much happening at that period of time. And I'm very happy to say that we went through with it. I don't know what it would have looked like if I hadn't done it at that time. I'm really not sure. I think I eventually would have gotten there, but if that job and I hadn't ended when it did, when would it have been? I don't know. I really can't answer that because I think we all get really comfortable sometimes too.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that perhaps postponing the wedding would have been an option, and in the end, it wasn't something that you sacrificed. But what kinds of things or moments or other sacrifices have you had to make throughout your career, especially in entrepreneurship, where it's not really 9 to 5, it always changes.
Absolutely, it's always changing, as you know very well too. There can be a lot of late nights. So I guess that would be one of the first things I would say is you're making your own schedule, but things can come up at the 11th hour. You might say, okay, today I'm going to work these hours loosely or whatever. It's always when you say, I'm going to end at this time, that something's thrown your way. And when it's your own business, it's only going to hurt you if you don't do what's really needed at that point. So, there can be a lot of unexpected things that happen. So, your plans may be impacted. You may have to, unfortunately, not participate in social functions for a while or at periods of time. You may have to literally put your business first. And I know this feeling well, and it's not a feeling I don't think I'd ever be comfortable with, but having to cancel on somebody because something's coming up with your business. And I hate doing that. Like we're friends as well. And that's a feeling that's a sacrifice that's very challenging to accept. You do the best you can. Another thing I would say is financial. Sacrifices, of course, right? So there was a long period of time where, you know, my husband and I were living in a place where we were not really happy living but we sacrifice staying there for the business, right? For both businesses, frankly speaking. When we rolled out ProCabbie, it was like we've bootstrapped that puppy up until now. And it's kind of terrifying when you really think about how much capital goes into startups and all businesses, of course, but particularly in the tech space, from my experience, the dollar amount is a lot higher, and you don't always know. You can do your predictions and budget things out as best as you can, and I'm not saying not to do that, but things change, right? And sometimes you just go way over budget, but you do what you got to do, right? And so financial, and then I guess the last thing I would want to mention is having to take in those criticisms from every corner of your life, whether that be from family members or friends or even other people in the business community, right? Criticism can be really helpful and it can be a learning experience, but it can be really challenging when somebody doesn't have any stakes in the game and they're just sort of, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of throwing their opinions out from the peanut gallery, and they're people that you care about, right? So it's sort of that balancing act between wanting to respect their questioning and their questions, but at the same time holding true to what is important to you and what path you're on yourself. Because
Mhm.
nobody really knows unless they're in it or on it, I believe, anyway.
And something really common for entrepreneurs, especially if you're going into a new direction, is perhaps people in your life and maybe, acquaintances or people in your external circles that you bump into not quite getting what you're doing.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that? I think because I think this is something that probably resonates with a lot of people who are in these early stages or maybe even middle stages of a business and perhaps feeling like an island because no one quite gets it.
Yeah. I think that's such an important thing to talk about. I think that it might look a little bit different for everybody, and I think it also depends on how affected you really are being by the exterior, right? And it's usually something we can't control. Some of it might be personality based. That's a bit of the psychology in me. But at the end of the day, I think surrounding yourself with people who kind of understand, who are other business owners, other women in business, particularly, I would say if you are a woman or a girl, is really helpful. I think, entrepreneurship is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful journey, but it can be really lonely. I personally work from home and I love that. But there are people who, when they transition to that life, they feel kind of like something's missing, right? They don't have the water cooler talk anymore. They don't have lunches with coworkers, maybe, especially in the beginning. If you're a small business, if you're a one person show or you're just a couple people, you might not have that opportunity to have team building exercises or outings, right? So what do? I think networking is really important, and that might be in person, that might be online, but there's many ways you can do that. I mean, we are so fortunate that we are in a day and age where, particularly through COVID, we saw how people really can come together online. There's groups on LinkedIn, there's groups on Facebook, and I would say not to discount the great value that those can really bring. Like I've met people, I'm sure you have too, from all over the world through some of these kind of platforms, right? So I think having a support system of people that understand what that looks like is really helpful, but also having some people in your life, even if it's just a couple of people personally, that you can trust to just let the load off once in a while, right? And I know you and I'm so grateful to you, Lynn, because I know you and I have that rapport, and that's
Mhm.
helped me immensely, honestly speaking. We share some other friends that are on completely different paths, and that's okay, but it's really it's comforting to know that you get it and to be able to, if you have a bad day, just say, like, I'm up to here and this is what's going on, just be able to vent it out, collect ourselves and move forward, because unfortunately we don't have much time to stay in that place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It
Stay in
is
it for a minute, but not, you know, forever.
absolutely, it's very helpful to at least be able to connect, get it off your chest.
Yeah.
Maybe, go back and forth with some ideas of solutions, or, even
Yes.
words of comfort, anything, and then get re-energized. But you got to get that negative energy out somehow.
You do. And I mean, if it's for you and you have the capacity to do it, if you can hire somebody like a business coach or something of that nature, that also I would say could be very helpful if you have that opportunity. And the other thing is, depending what kind of business you're in, besides just networking and support groups, there's a lot of incubators out there. So especially if you're in the tech sphere, one thing I'd love to plug the Canadian Women's Network at this point, but they run a lot of programming, for example, for women in tech, where I did the fundraising accelerator last year and I met women in tech from across Canada, and that was really helpful too, to just hear about different people's journeys and to also be connected with people who aren't just at the phase you're at in business, who maybe might be a little bit further along as well, because it can give you a real eye into maybe not what you're going to do, but how that may look, right? And then to have people that can support you through that. And if you can get yourself involved in some kind of mentorship situation, I think that would be another really helpful thing. There's a lot of those kind of things out there. Myself, I'm connected with the forum, and they asked me to be a mentor, but frankly speaking, I feel like I'm learning from my mentees as well. So just having those people that you make a point to regularly connect with, I think can carry you a long way.
Let's shift it now to the future. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
I love this question. It's the big dreamer in me. But I mean, now I am working from home, of course, but a dream I've always had is to be able to work from anywhere in the world. Like, to be able to literally work from my dream locale, have my little computer. Maybe I'm looking at the ocean in front of me. Literally, this is a dream of mine, to be one day able to finance something like that, but still be able to do what I love doing, but do it from anywhere and incorporate travel into that. I would love that. I would also love to be able to, at some point, grow the business to a point where I'm working with clients internationally. I mean, with ProCabby, yes, we've built it to be a scalable kind of global platform. So we already are sort of dipping our toes into connecting with people from all over the world, which is great. But even on the consulting side, I would love to maybe see and explore what that looks like. And I know, the internet age that we live in, borders are very much broken down because of the virtual world we're in. So I think it's attainable. I believe in that. The other thing is I've sort of gotten involved with, speaking at some conferences, virtual conferences, been on some podcasts, which I really love talking about this stuff and business and women in business and tech. But I would love to be able to monetize that at some point, be able to be a paid speaker. That's something I would love to explore more in the next 5 to 10 years.
Now, beyond those 5 to 10 years, what are your long-term goals for your life?
For my life. So many. One of the biggest things is, I'm proud to be a Canadian person in many senses. However, the winters are long. They're very long. And it would be a dream of mine in my life for, us to have our home base here, but also have a home base somewhere else, somewhere maybe more tropical. So working towards being able to have another locale somewhere else would be great. I've also always had this big vision that I would love to get back to the hospitality space one day. I always wanted to have this hospitality business. And I know with Airbnb, the landscape's changed a bit, but I don't know, maybe even have like an Airbnb or a small inn or something like that. I've always thought that would be really cool to do that. Aside from that stuff, I think giving back is always something that's really important. And, volunteering is really great. But I would love to at some point be maybe able to even start my own nonprofit or organization like that, where I'd be able to give back. And I know that you and I have talked about some of our shared interests there with, the homelessness issue. And so many people not having a place to call home, as well as working with seniors. That really ignited me in many senses, and be able to contribute to making seniors lives a little bit more comfortable. I think we have a lot of work to do in that regard. So those are a couple things that are stewing around. They're really big life goals for me.
And with those big life goals, but wonderful goals and everything you've got going on, how do you motivate yourself on days where you just feel like you don't feel like it, you're not in the mood, you have this wonderful bubbly personality, but everyone has off days. So how on
Absolutely.
those days, how do you just get out there and say, you know what, I've got to do these things today, or, over weeks or whatnot? How do you get those fires started where they're just not there?
Yeah, you're right. We all have those days. You can be a very chipper person and positive individual, but we're all going to have down days, and you're going to have a lot of down days in business. This is just the reality. So I think it's taken me a long time to get there, and there's still days where it's really, really tough. However, I think looking at where you've come from up until where you are now. So, looking back on your journey, where you've been, the wins that you've experienced, and they don't just have to be massive wins, but some of the best pieces of business advice I ever received was to always take time to celebrate the wins in your business, no matter how big or small they are. And I think looking at just not what you've done in your business per se, but positive feedback that people in your life have given to you, and sort of keeping that on hand for yourself is really important. Whether that's an email folder, whether that's a note in your phone. I mean, for myself, I kind of try and track some of the things that I feel proud about that I've accomplished, so that on those days when I feel like nothing is working and what's the point of doing any of it, looking at that and just taking a few minutes to look at that can be really helpful. I also think, people get kind of sick of hearing about self care and things like that, but there's really a lot of obviously great importance to doing those things. So, whether that be journaling or taking time in nature or some kind of movement, getting your body moving can help to shift that negative mind space a bit too. And then I guess the last thing I would say is reach out to one of those people in that network that we were talking about. Undoubtedly they've been there too. So if you can take the time to reach out to one of those people and just, maybe have a phone call or have a text exchange or something, and just like you said before, just get some of that negative stuff off your chest. I think sometimes that's the fuel you need to reignite the fire, to keep going. And then at the end of the day, if really none of that's working, get back to the big vision. Like, I'm a big post-it note person, but sometimes it can be helpful, right, to have some of these big whys. You need to know what your why is at the end of the day, right? And so I think money is important, but if your only motivator is financial, it's going to be really difficult to self motivate when those days come your way. That's important. I'm not saying it's not, but if you have a strong, resounding why inside of you beyond that, or in addition to that, I think that can be really, really advantageous, and it can reignite you. Also, maybe reading some positive affirmations, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of rambling, but there's lots of things I think.
Oh, I love that you mentioned that. And I love that you mentioned keeping track somehow of your wins and your accomplishments. Because, I mean, speaking from experience, but also from talking to other people and hearing what they have to say, I think we kind of lose track of the things that we've done, the things that have worked out well, the wins that we've had, because when you're going towards such big goals, it's just another, door along the way, and you see the doors in front of you as opposed to celebrating the door you just went through. And it can be really
Yeah.
difficult without keeping track of those to remember, like, oh yeah,
Oh, for
that did
sure.
happen. That was great. I'm really happy that, worked out. And
Yeah.
you can kind of remember those times and realize, well, I'm not at zero. I'm at, whatever it is. Um, it's a twisty, windy road, but you're only at zero once
Yeah.
if you're
I
going towards
appreciate
zero.
that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
No, you've had, like, as you mentioned, and the twisty, windy road to get to where you are now and the goals you're pursuing. However, what do you feel is the best educational preparation for someone wanting to pursue the same type or types of career that you're doing now? You could pick one, you can, talk about all of them. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, so of course, I think education's important, right? Like this is one of the reasons we're here is to talk about different streams that people can take and different pathways that young people can explore. I think education, number one, my grandma used to always say, no one can ever take your education away from you. And I always remembered that. And, she unfortunately did not have the opportunity to go to higher education, right? But I always remembered that. So I think no matter what, you're going to learn something, you're going to acquire skills. And if you take a program or something like that that ends up not being maybe the right fit, it's never lost. But I think if you do want to go into business, it doesn't hurt to explore, a business diploma of some kind or some kind of business courses at the university level, perhaps. I think that's all really helpful. Um, I think it also depends sort of what your longer term goals are too, right? Like I may not, from where I sit, if somebody wants to go into entrepreneurship, I don't think it's a bad starting point to have a finance degree, but I do think there's so much more to business besides that. So I think MBAs are great, but they're not for everybody. And I certainly don't think you need an MBA to be an entrepreneur. I think a lot of entrepreneurship education is life education. But yeah, if I'm looking at more institutional programming, I would say business management, marketing, communications are all really great things to look at. I mean, I have a psychology degree and it's not exactly aligned, but it's amazing to me how much I refer to the psychology in business. I think there's such a strong link, even sociology, right? Like you're dealing with people. And when you like marketing is such a huge aspect of business. There's so many moving parts, but marketing is massive, especially today, right? We've got to keep up with all these demands online of our presence and posting things and having a polished website and doing all these things. And at the end of the day, I'm going a little bit in a circle, but I think if you have some marketing experience, whether even if you just take a course like, a certification course or something like that, I think that could be really helpful for you. And if you're looking to go into the IT sphere, it's a little bit different, right? Like it depends what you want to do. If you have the goal to build an app or a game or something like that, you're going to need to know how to code or find somebody who can code. And the reality is that if you're connecting with local business professionals here, if you're hiring people here to build your platform, it comes at a very expensive price tag. So if you can learn to do a lot of that stuff yourself, that could be helpful, right? So I know there's college programming and that regard. But there's things that are more advanced too, like, software engineering and stuff like that, where I think you're pretty set if you take something like that and then you want to build your own platform. I think you have a good handle of how to start anyway.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned throughout the interview so far a lot about networking and connecting with people. Do you see it more of as a social obligation for people in entrepreneurship? And if I can use a little bit of, an example from your life, it's you and your husband in this, but you're the face. You're the one doing this social networking. And so how would you kind of encapsulate the importance of networking for anyone in the entrepreneurship industry, and how much of it really impacts your company?
I think it's huge. And I honestly think if you don't have some kind of PR initiatives in place yourself, or you hire a company to do it, some kind of networking in place, some kind of marketing, I just don't know how you're going to do it. I just, where I sit, that has been one of the biggest things that has helped me with my business is that piece, the networking piece, right? And doing things like this and going on podcasts and meeting people, because you never know where those connections can lead. And you also never know what you're going to learn. And I think that that's huge. I just think it's really difficult. Like, I do hear sometimes about people who don't have any online presence and they have a successful business. But I think in today's landscape, that's very, very rare. I think word of mouth is huge, but that's also kind of part of networking, right? The way I see it, it's kind of all linked, right? If you don't know these people, they may not be able to refer you, right? And so it's the value of the connections you have. But I would say it's irreplaceable. That aspect of business is one of the most important things I think that you need to focus on.
It almost seems like it's part of the culture, the entrepreneurship culture. How else would you describe the entrepreneurship culture, or does it depend on the industry of entrepreneurship in which you're in?
I think it depends. I do think it definitely depends what industry you're in. I think it depends if you're a one person show versus having a team. I think that also can change that. But like we kind of talked about before, there is this hustle culture glorification. It's just the reality. You go on social media and you see it everywhere. And I think there's a little bit of that ingrained, not just about what you want the shiny, glamorous part of the lifestyle to look like. When I say hustle, I also mean about these people that, no disrespect, but that work, 17 or 18-hour days. And I think there is a segment of entrepreneurship culture that if you're not doing that, you're sort of looked down upon. It's like, well, how are you going to get anywhere if you're not sweating it out? You're like, you don't sleep, you don't eat, you just do all of this. Personally, I know from experience for myself, that doesn't fare me very well. And I don't know very many people who can function like that long term. So I think there is a bit of that going on. I also think it can be pretty competitive. I think it does really depend on your industry. But I just look at, for example, the coaching space. You and I probably both know a ton of coaches, and there's a lot of amazing coaches out there, right? Who bring so much value and they're so great at what they do. But it's pretty competitive. Like, if you were to go today and you didn't know a coach, or you weren't really sure who to hire, for example, or you were starting out, I think it could be really challenging to know who to choose because there's a lot of people to choose from. I'll kind of wheel it into Marketingverse a bit. I think a lot of that also is your marketing. I think it's really important for people, for example, sort of going down that tangent, but say you're a coach, right? You are the face of your whole enterprise, right? And so I think sometimes you really need to be sure that you're showing people your personality and you're showing people who you are, because that could make or break somebody choosing you or not. But yeah, I think there's some competition for sure. But at the end of the day, I think it's kind of industry specific. With ProCabbie, one of the biggest cultural aspects, like we talked about, is that it's very male dominated. That's the reality. There are women, but I've met probably a handful of them. Like on these hands, I would say, like drivers, there's a few, but industry stakeholders or executives, it's pretty few and far between. And I don't think that's the only industry like that. Obviously, I think there are other industries like that. That's a very industry specific thing though for the chauffeur space.
Mm-hmm. And also beyond the culture, and they all, each of them have their positive and negatives, but beyond that, what current issues and trends in the field of entrepreneurship, uh should those who are interested in pursuing it, what should they be aware of? Do you have anything that comes to mind that you see could have a bigger impact on the industry?
Yeah, so a huge hot potato topic right now for anybody who's in business is obviously technology and AI. So AI is something that I think if you're in business, we're all trying to learn. It's happening at a very accelerated rate. I don't think that you necessarily need to completely transform and have AI integrate into every aspect of your business, but I do think you need to be aware of it. I think that this is only going to become more common and prevalent. So I would say AI is a really hot topic right now in marketing, in business, and automation can be great, but it's sort of navigating how you're going to incorporate that aspect of technology that's going to work for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can save you time, is the reality if it's done properly. With regards to, say, ProCabbie in that industry, it's another tech piece, but it's the whole self-driving taxi piece. It's the whole flying taxi. So there's a lot of innovation happening on the vehicle side, but there's also a lot of innovation on the municipality and city side. So there's a lot of conversations happening around how we're going to make cities more eco-friendly, how we're going to encourage people to use more public transit, which also translates into, biking more, creating more bike lanes, less vehicles on the road. And like I said before, self-driving cars and all that, but that's really moving towards the electric vehicles. So those are really massive things that are happening right now in those industries, I would say, that we have to, like, you can't ignore.
And from your experience and your observations, when people leave the industry, what are the usual reasons?
I think one of the biggest things that we're now talking about more is burnout.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a lot of people that I've met a few of them who were business owners and who just got, up to here with feeling like they just couldn't do it all. Maybe they were sort of, entrenched in this sort of hustle environment in some sense. But I think that burnout can really drive people away from any industry, frankly, not just entrepreneurship. But I think that's one thing that we're talking about more and we know is a reality. Another thing is someone may just say, you know what, I'm ready to retire. Like, a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, don't necessarily like, number one, we don't really have a retirement fund. You need to create your own retirement fund. And you may work a little bit longer than people who may have a pension, right? Because you have to. But I mean, retirement happens in every industry too. And I think the last thing would be financial reasons. So, we all need to sustain a living. We, need to pay our bills. And there's times where unfortunately it just becomes too financially taxing. I was going to say emotionally taxing. There's also that, but too financially taxing where, you know what, you maybe just can't afford to do it anymore. You might be in debt from what you've done, the ventures that you've undergone. I mean, it happens, right? And so sometimes things beyond your control may take over, but those are the things that really come top of mind. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who are serial entrepreneurs. So I think that's sort of, I don't know if I'd say it's a gene in us. I'm sure you can relate to that too, because you have multiple things on the go. But I think a lot of people, if they can, typically don't go back to maybe more the traditional workforce. It happens though, right? There's people that go out on their own and they realize it's not for them, and that's totally okay. It's not for everybody. And it's not for the faint of heart, like I always say.
And you mentioned humorously the entrepreneurship gene, but it could be along with that, the people that you've met in the entrepreneurship industry, what personal attributes do you feel contribute the most to success?
I think that number one, I think having some strong communication abilities will carry you far, not just in entrepreneurship, but I think in business, that's something that can really help you out. And you don't have to be a super outgoing person. So if somebody was hearing this and thought, well, I'm more introverted, that's okay. But if you don't have to be outgoing to have strong communication skills, right? So whether that be verbally or written, I think those are really important attributes to have. I think adaptability is a big one as well. Curveballs are going to come your way, and how are you going to manage that? If you are a person who doesn't take change very well, it might be challenging, right? I think we can work on adaptability. I don't think like it's completely innate and we all know how to do it from the get-go, but I think working on, picking your battles too, right? Like I know for myself, especially in the beginning, one little hiccup and there's a meltdown happening. I think over the years I've been better able to sort of pick which ones I'm going to melt over, I guess I would say. I think if you're a visionary, if you're a goal oriented person, I think those things are all going to help you out as well. And, I think you also need to be able to not give up so easily. It's very tempting, when things aren't going well or you see your bank account dwindling down and you don't know what's going to happen, but sort of being able to sit in that place. Also, to have a bit of faith and be able to have confidence in what you bring to the table, right? Like, it's very intimidating out of the gate to put yourself out to the world and say you're an entrepreneur and say, this is my baby, right? But to have confidence and know the strong skills and special gifts that you bring to the table that set you apart is also very helpful.
So you mentioned some personal attributes that people tend to have when they have more success. But looking at it in a different way, what do you wish you had known about working in the industry when you first started, whether it be a personal attribute that you would have to develop or something else completely?
I think one thing that's kind of stuck with me is I've heard a lot that your first business is not going to be the successful one. And I think that's not always true, but I think it's something to kind of keep in mind, right? Your first business is kind of like your baby that you're learning. You're learning all the hard truths through, right? And so I think it's really important to keep in mind and to be kind to yourself that there's going to be things that don't work. You're going to slip up, but they're all learning experiences. So I think that that's something to kind of spin it in a positive way that could be really helpful for you. Another thing is depending on the industry, but with regards to the tech sphere specifically, bootstrapping, if you're able to do it, is great. But I think having an idea about where financing in the future is going to come from is also really, really crucial. I don't know if I'm answering your question well, but those things are what are kind of first coming to the top of my mind when you ask that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because things, especially like financing, are not necessarily what we think of when we want to start a business. Depending on what it is, right? If it's something that you can work on a bit more solo, you may
Yeah,
not think of it as much until you get to a point where you realize it's a lot by yourself to one or to two people. And so I think it's really important to put those things out there, to get
yeah.
people start thinking a little bit more of, what else should be considered, what else should be on their to-do list or need to read up on lists, things like that.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you don't have a typical day or week, but could you tell us a bit about, what that could look like for you, either be a day or a week?
Yeah, so it's changed a lot, of course, since the pandemic, right? Before COVID, there was a lot more in-person networking events that were happening. So that would be a big thing. Now, a lot of stuff, some stuff has come back, but I find a lot of people have gone virtual. But I think aside from your daily tasks of, there's the whole notions of working in your business and working on your business, right? So I think in any given week, no matter how you do it, no matter how you run your schedule, I think you need to obviously be looking at those two camps, right? Like, how are you going to prospect clients? How are you going to put like the sales funnel, right? How are you going to book, consultations and discovery calls? And then how are you going to convert those people, into clients? But then looking at the big vision for your business. Where do you want this company to go? Are you looking to expand? So plugging away at those kind of things, whether that be, bringing new people on or engaging in, you may have partners, right, that are not necessarily in your business, but for example, an accountant. Are there things that you need to be doing, giving to your account? Is there bookkeeping you need to do? There's a Entrepreneurship has a lot of different aspects to it, right? But you do need to work in your business and work on your business. You also need to be in a given week looking at what kind of marketing you're doing. Are you doing any PR? That could be, participating in LinkedIn Lives. It could be podcasts. It could be, different things like that. What kind of networking are you doing? Which also wheels back to the sales cycle, right? It's all kind of connected, but what kind of networking initiatives are you going to do? Are you going to join, say, the Women's Chamber of Commerce, or are you a BNI or something like that? Or are you going to do something that's a little less committal, but still get you meeting new people? I think these are all things that we really are looking on a weekly basis, right? The other thing is actually doing the work for your clients, right? Whatever that is. If you have a product or service, it's going to look different, right? But if it's a product, you're going to be fulfilling orders, you're going to be engaging with customers. You might be, like I said, maybe not bookkeeping, but you're doing invoicing and stuff like that. So I think it looks really different depending on the business, but I think those are all kind of key things that you can think about. And with regards to marketing too, whether you're doing it yourself or you're outsourcing for that, what messaging are you putting out this week? Are you, and I don't think everybody needs to go on video, but I do think video can really help capture your audience and get people to understand you more. So, I know there's business owners who are so great about, going on and doing lives and putting their face out there like 5 days a week. I don't think you need to do that, but I think a good goal is to try and do something like that maybe every week if you can, or every other week, So I think those are all good things. I hope I didn't miss anything.
No, and I think it's really important that you mentioned video, because of how things are evolving now, and video is the most sought after format now, and it's quickly becoming, a larger percentage. Uh, that it can seem very intimidating at first, and I've been part
Yeah.
of that camp, and just kind of like
Yeah.
forcing it at first, and you start to develop a bit more comfort around it. I know that you're very comfortable in those kinds of areas, and you've had experience in your life where you've been on radio, you've been part of, the networking scene a lot longer. Are any of those, or perhaps other areas, any of your favorite part about being an entrepreneur?
Yes, those I would say definitely the PR and the marketing pieces are definitely my most loved parts. Like I just love talking about entrepreneurship, like doing stuff like this, connecting with other women in business, going on podcasts. I love podcasts. Like I think it's really a great way to learn about your own business. Like it's like interviews like this, for example, even if it's on a podcast, you're being asked questions that you've maybe never thought about before. It might get you to think about your business in a completely different way. Aside from obviously the perk of promoting your company and having some material to put out there, I think you can learn a lot about yourself and a lot about your business and your company and where you want to go by engaging and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's some of the stuff I definitely love to do. And I just love learning about people's visions and what they have going on. It just inspires me. So, yeah, I would say that's my favorite part.
And you have a lot of different experience, and being an entrepreneur kind of forces you, at least at the start, to wear different hats. If the industry were to be completely gone tomorrow and you have to go work into something else, what would you feel prepared to do?
Number one, I think it'd be a very hard pill to swallow because I'm so like deep into this, but I do have to think about that sometimes. I think I'd be quite well suited. I mean, I do have some sales experience. I think depending what it was, I think I would be well equipped to work in sales in some capacity. I think I'd be equipped to work in marketing. Like I'm not a designer, right? So that's why we have team members, but being a spokesperson even. And I'm also getting a bit into voiceovers right now. And that's part of our new offering too. But maybe exploring that even further, going into the voiceover side. One of the, like we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, one of the big jobs that I wanted to try, I guess I would say when I was younger was to be an actor. And so maybe I'm not going to just, throw it all in and just, I'm going to Broadway. I don't know if that's realistic, but, doing something like voiceovers, whether it be just for business or maybe even in TV or movie, I think that would be really fun. And I think I'd be kind of equipped for that. I also think I would be well equipped to work in management in some respect. I don't know if working for big corporate is really my calling. I'm not saying that I couldn't do that, but I think for me, I'd be really well suited to work for a smaller business or something like that. Even a startup business or something, because I've been there. But somebody's kind of got the reins, but I can bring my experience to the table for them. I think those would be some good things. And I always have, I do have experience teaching English. That's a little bit of a side note, right? I'm not saying that entrepreneurship's necessarily connected to that, but I think we learn a lot of skills in entrepreneurship that we don't realize impact our skill set. Like we might not register it. So honestly, I think because we wear so many hats in entrepreneurship, you basically could, I mean, except for professional designations, right? I'm not saying you could go and be a physician or something if you're not qualified to do that. But I think you're well suited to try your hand on a lot of different things if you were to leave that world, or like you said, that world wasn't an option anymore.
Andrea, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And answering all these questions, I think you imparted some really good pieces of information and a lot of things that people will be able to relate with. But before I let you go, I would love to give you the floor. If you could share any piece of advice that you would have for anyone thinking about going into entrepreneurship or who are already started.
I love that you're asking me this. So I'm going to share something that came to me through my experiences, and this is what I'll say. Your desire to achieve must be greater than your desire for everyone to see your vision. It's got to come from here, right? You're going to have the naysayers, you're going to have the criticism, you're going to have the sideways looks, but at the end of the day, if you know what your great desire is, I think that that can carry you super far when you want to do something amazing like being an entrepreneur.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It was a great conversation.